Whoa, hold on. That's disrespectful.
How could you say that?
We don't do that here. Respect and love, y'all.
The cameras were already recording when Derek Manning turned toward his wife Sonia and said something that instantly changed the entire mood of the studio. Just answer the question right for once. You're embarrassing me. The words were sharp, they were loud, and worst of all, they were heard by everyone. The Family Feud audience, which moments earlier had been laughing and cheering, suddenly became completely silent. 200 people sat frozen in their seats. Sonia Manning stood beside the buzzer, her hands still hovering near it. She wasn't even given a chance to respond before the words hit her. Her face turned red, her eyes dropped, and for a moment it looked like she was trying to disappear right there on stage. But Steve Harvey noticed something that many people in the audience missed. This wasn't just a husband getting frustrated during a game. This wasn't a harmless joke. This was something deeper. Steve slowly lowered the cards in his hand. The smile that millions of viewers knew disappeared from his face. He looked at Derek. Then, he looked at Sonia. And after a long pause, Steve Harvey said the words nobody expected to hear during a Family Feud episode. "Sir, step off stage." The entire studio went quiet. For a second, Derek looked confused. He seemed to believe Steve was simply creating another funny television moment. But Steve's expression never changed. "I'm serious," Steve said calmly. "Step off this stage right now." The laughter was gone. The cameras were still rolling, and everyone watching realized they were no longer seeing a normal game show moment. They were witnessing something much bigger. Because what happened next would reveal a story Sonia had kept hidden for years. Earlier that morning, the Atlanta studio looked like any other Family Feud taping day. The crew moved quickly behind the scenes. Lights were being adjusted. Contestants were practicing their introductions. The audience was finding their seats. And Steve Harvey arrived with the same energy he brought to every show. He joked with the production team, greeted the families, and prepared for another day of laughter and competition. Nobody inside that studio knew that before the day ended, one unexpected moment would change a woman's life forever. Backstage, two families waited for their turn. One was the Manning family. Derek and Sonia Manning had been married for 11 years. To everyone watching from the outside, they appeared to be a normal couple. They had 2 children, a comfortable home, simple jobs, a regular family life. Derek worked in regional sales. Sonia managed the front office at a pediatric dental practice. Their neighbors saw them as a quiet, ordinary couple. Their friends believed they had a stable marriage. But there was a side of their relationship that almost nobody knew about. A side Sonia had spent years hiding. Because sometimes the hardest struggles are not the ones people can see. Sometimes the deepest pain happens quietly, behind closed doors, without witnesses, without anyone knowing. For years, Sonia had learned how to adjust herself around Derek's moods. She learned when to speak, when to stay silent, when to avoid certain conversations. Little comments became normal. Small criticisms became part of everyday life. Derek would correct the way she did simple things, the way she organized the kitchen, the way she answered questions, the way she expressed herself around other people. Sometimes he would laugh afterward, making it seem like he was only joking. But Sonia knew those moments stayed with her. Over time, she stopped fighting back. Not because it didn't hurt, but because explaining her feelings often created another argument. So she adapted. She became quieter. She became more careful. And slowly, without realizing it, she started making herself smaller just to keep peace. That was the person standing on the Family Feud stage that day. A woman who had spent years trying not to cause problems. A woman who had learned to ignore her own feelings. A woman who never expected that a simple answer on a game show would finally expose everything she had been carrying. The game had started with the kind of energy people expected from Family Feud. The audience was laughing. The families were cheering. Steve Harvey was moving between the teams, making jokes and keeping everyone entertained. For a while, everything felt normal. The Manning family even started strong. Sonia answered a few questions correctly, and the audience applauded when her answers matched the board. For a brief moment, she looked different. She smiled. She relaxed. She looked like the woman she had been before years of constant criticism slowly changed the way she carried herself. But that moment did not last. Because as the rounds continued, the pressure started building. And then came the question that changed everything. Sonia stepped forward. The lights were on her. The audience was watching. She thought carefully and gave her answer. It was not a ridiculous answer. It was not careless. It was simply a guess that didn't match the survey results, a normal part of the game. But Derek's reaction was immediate. The cameras caught it. His expression changed. He leaned toward Sonia and spoke loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Just answer the question right for once. You're embarrassing me. The words landed harder than any wrong answer ever could. The audience stopped laughing. The other contestants looked uncomfortable. And Sonia stood there silently. But Steve Harvey was watching more than just the words. He was watching Sonia's reaction. The way she didn't argue. The way she didn't defend herself. The way she immediately looked down, as if she had experienced that exact moment many times before. Steve had seen thousands of contestants walk onto that stage. He knew the difference between a playful argument and genuine hurt. And this was not a joke. This was a woman who looked like she had been holding something inside for a very long time. Steve slowly placed his cards down. The energy in the room changed completely. Derek, Steve said. His voice was calm, but everyone could hear the seriousness behind it. Derek looked surprised. He expected maybe a joke, maybe a comment, maybe the moment would pass. But Steve continued. That is not how you talk to somebody standing beside you. The studio became silent. Derek tried to explain himself. He suggested that he was only frustrated, that it was part of the competition, that Sonia knew he was joking. But Steve didn't accept that explanation. Because sometimes the problem isn't one sentence. The problem is the pattern behind that sentence. Steve looked at Sonia. And for a moment, the entire audience saw something in her face. Not anger, not embarrassment. Something else. Something closer to exhaustion. Like someone who had spent years pretending everything was fine. That was when Steve made his decision. Sir. Step off stage. The words shocked everyone. The producers looked at each other. The contestants froze. Even Derek seemed unable to understand what had just happened. He slowly walked toward the edge of the stage, waiting for Steve to smile and reveal it was all part of the show. But Steve didn't smile. I'm not joking with you, Steve said. This is not entertainment. This is not how we treat people. Step off the stage. A stage manager moved forward and guided Derek away from the family podium. The cameras continued recording. And now, Sonia was standing alone. For the first time that day, nobody was correcting her. Nobody was telling her what she did wrong. Nobody was making her feel small. Steve walked toward her. But instead of standing over her as a host, he lowered himself slightly, so they were at the same level. His voice became softer. Ma'am, I want to ask you something. Sonia looked at him. I need you to answer honestly. A long pause followed. Then Steve asked the question that broke through years of silence. How long has that been happening? For a few seconds, Sonia said nothing. She tried to hold herself together, but then her eyes filled with tears. And quietly, she answered. Longer than I want to admit. The audience reacted with a deep silence. Because everyone understood. This was bigger than one comment. Bigger than one wrong answer. Bigger than one game show moment. Steve nodded slowly. Because he knew that sometimes a person doesn't need someone to solve everything in one moment. Sometimes they just need someone to finally say, I see what is happening. And for Sonia, that was the first time in years someone had said it out loud. For the first time in years, Sonia wasn't trying to explain herself to Derek. She wasn't trying to prove she wasn't wrong. She wasn't trying to avoid making someone else uncomfortable. She was simply standing there, being heard. Steve Harvey looked at her carefully. He understood that the moment on stage was not just about one comment. A single sentence rarely breaks someone. Usually, it is hundreds of moments added together. Hundreds of times someone is made to feel smaller. Hundreds of times, someone questions their own worth. And Steve knew that what the audience had just witnessed was only the surface. Sonia, Steve said gently, I want you to understand something. You didn't do anything wrong by answering a question. The audience remained completely quiet. Every person was focused on her. You don't deserve to be spoken to like that, Steve continued. Those words were simple, but for Sonia, they carried a weight she hadn't felt in years. Because somewhere along the way, she had started believing that maybe she was the problem. Maybe she was too sensitive. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe marriage was just supposed to feel this way after enough years. But hearing someone else say it out loud made her realize something. It wasn't normal. It wasn't love. And it wasn't respect. Sonia wiped away her tears. She admitted that this wasn't the first time Derek had spoken to her that way. It wasn't even close. For years, she had convinced herself that every relationship had problems. Every couple argued. Every husband and wife had difficult moments. But deep inside, she knew there was a difference between disagreements and constantly feeling like you were never enough. She talked about how she had slowly changed herself, how she stopped sharing certain opinions because she already knew how Derek would respond, how she avoided certain conversations, how she became careful with every word she said. The audience listened silently. Many people watching could recognize that feeling, the feeling of slowly losing pieces of yourself just to keep someone else happy. Steve turned toward the audience. "I want everybody watching this to understand something," he said. "Sometimes people think hurt only counts when there is a visible mark. But words can hurt. Constant criticism can hurt. Making somebody feel like they are never good enough can hurt." The cameras showed audience members wiping away tears. Some were nodding. Some were holding their hands over their mouths. Because what started as a Family Feud episode had become something much more personal. Steve then made another unexpected decision. He walked back toward the center of the stage. "Derek made a choice today," Steve said. "He chose to embarrass someone who was standing beside him. But today, Sonia gets to make her own choice." The studio stayed silent. Steve asked Sonia if she still wanted to continue playing the game. For a moment she looked uncertain. For years she had made decisions based on what would keep peace. But this time, the decision belonged to her. She looked toward the game board. Then she looked at Steve, and quietly said, "Yes, I want to finish." The audience immediately stood and applauded. Not because she gave the right answer. Not because she won money. But because, for the first time that day, Sonia chose herself. The other family members on stage stepped closer to support her. They told her she wasn't alone. They reminded her that everyone makes mistakes. But nobody deserves to be humiliated. Steve smiled. "That's the energy I want to see," he said. People lifting each other up. The game continued. But the atmosphere had changed. Sonia was no longer the nervous woman standing beside Derek, afraid of getting an answer wrong. She was a contestant with confidence. A person with a voice. And every time she stepped toward that buzzer, the audience cheered louder. Because everyone watching understood that this wasn't just about winning a game. It was about a woman remembering who she was. And sometimes, the biggest victory isn't the money you take home. Sometimes the biggest victory is finally realizing that you deserve respect. The game continued, but something had changed. The audience was no longer watching just a competition. They were watching a woman slowly find her confidence again. Every answer Sonia gave was met with encouragement. Every step she took toward the buzzer was met with applause. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't looking around to see if someone approved of her. She was simply being herself. And Steve Harvey noticed. He had seen thousands of contestants walk onto that stage. He had witnessed celebrations, arguments, surprises, and emotional moments. But this was different. Because this wasn't about a survey question. It was about dignity. After the round ended, Steve walked back toward Sonia. The cameras focused on them. The entire studio waited. "Sonia," Steve said, "I want you to remember this moment. You walked onto this stage thinking you were here to play a game. But maybe you were brought here for something else." The audience listened carefully. Sometimes life puts you in a place where the truth finally gets seen. And today, everybody saw you. Sonia looked down, trying to control her emotions. Steve continued. "You spent a long time making yourself smaller to make somebody else comfortable. But you don't have to do that anymore." Those words affected her deeply. Because for years, she had measured every decision by how Derek would react. What would make him angry? What would avoid another argument? What would keep everything calm? But standing there under the bright studio lights, surrounded by strangers who were supporting her, Sonia realized something. She had spent years protecting a relationship while slowly losing herself, and maybe it was time to protect herself. After the episode ended, Sonia said the moment stayed with her long after the cameras stopped recording. She explained that hearing Steve speak to her that day gave her something she hadn't felt in years: permission to trust her own feelings. She finally understood that she wasn't being dramatic, she wasn't too sensitive, she wasn't imagining things. The small comments, the constant corrections, the feeling of always needing to be careful, they had slowly affected the way she saw herself. And recognizing that was the beginning of change. With support from people around her, Sonia started rebuilding her life. She reconnected with friends she had slowly lost contact with. She spent more time with her children. And most importantly, she began learning how to make decisions without fear. The woman who once avoided speaking up started discovering her own voice again. Months later, Sonia reflected on that day. She said the most important thing Steve gave her wasn't advice. It wasn't attention. It wasn't even the support that came afterward. It was the simple act of someone finally saying, "What happened to you matters." Because sometimes people don't need someone to fight every battle for them. Sometimes they just need someone brave enough to stand beside them and say, "You deserve better." The moment on Family Feud became a reminder for everyone watching that respect should never disappear inside a relationship. Love should never require someone to lose themselves. And kindness should never be considered too much to ask for. Steve Harvey later explained that his decision on stage wasn't planned. There was no script, no producer telling him what to say. He simply reacted to what he saw. Because sometimes, even in a place designed for entertainment, real life breaks through. And when that happens, ignoring it is not an option. Steve said that moment reminded him why people connect with stories like Sonia's. Because behind every person sitting in the audience, there may be a struggle nobody knows about, a battle nobody sees, a pain nobody hears. And sometimes one unexpected moment can become the turning point someone needed. For Sonia, that day was not remembered as the day she was embarrassed on television. It became the day she stopped accepting being treated as invisible. The day she realized her voice mattered. The day she understood that standing up for herself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. And the biggest lesson from that Family Feud stage was simple. A person can spend years being silent. But it only takes one moment of courage to begin changing everything.